24 hours of comings and goings. Going, the first 2 American hostages released by Hamas, Judith Renan and her daughter Natalie, leaving the Gaza Strip. A flicker of light in the darkness. Coming to the Gaza Strip after 4 days of talks and carrying aid for a population of over 2 million, running desperately low on everything. But only 20 trucks so far. That's all that American power can broker in the region. Before the war, Gaza was receiving 450 trucks a day of supplies. It needs many more of these to keep starvation at the gates. It also needs fuel to power the generators that pump the water. And so far, Israel has not allowed that because they say it could be used for military purposes by Hamas. Neither coming nor going, Israeli tanks at the border with Gaza. Hundreds of them waiting behind the vines to begin their harvest of destruction. What's keeping them from moving is a combination of factors. Pleas for caution from Washington and the realization that neither Israel nor anyone else has a clue of who or what will run the Gaza Strip when all this is over. The waiting soldier with a guitar may be the only relaxed individual in this entire region. Far from relaxed today in Cairo, in a parallel universe of make-believe diplomacy at a hastily convened peace summit. Some of the world's leaders, but by no means all or the most important. Israel didn't show up, America barely. The Italian Prime Minister did. She's worried that a war in the Middle East will increase the flood of refugees across the Mediterranean. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who lacks precisely that over his own people. The Bahraini leaders, worried like many princes of the Gulf that more Palestinian suffering could ignite unrest in their own backyards. Less Arab Spring, more Arab winter of rage. Keep an eye on them, by the way, the Qataris. They speak to Hamas and to Israel. But above all, listen to the pleas behind the plosives of the King of Jordan.
The relentless bombing campaign underway in Gaza, as we speak, is cruel and unconscionable on every level. It is collective punishment of a besieged and helpless people. Anywhere else attacking civilian infrastructure and deliberately starving an entire population of food, water, electricity, and basic necessities would be condemned. And it has been done before, recently, in another conflict.
And by that he meant Russia's war against Ukraine. So many around this table accuse the West's supporters of Israel of double standards. And there's the rub, as chants for Palestine replace sympathy for Israel. In Sydney, in Bangkok, in London, or in Washington, all today. The man in the White House wants us to see the world as divided between the forces of democracy and autocracy, between good and evil. This war has made that more complicated. 2 weeks ago, hardly anyone spoke about the Palestinians. Now no one can talk about anything else.
Well, President Biden has said he is overjoyed at the release of the 2 US hostages, Judith and Natalie Renan, who are now being reunited with family members. More than 200 people are still being held captive in Gaza, including 30 children. For one moment longer, their hands tightly grasped by one of their captors, Natalie and Judith Renan are led out, released into the safety of the Red Cross. For 2 weeks, alongside more than 200 others, they've been held hostage by Hamas. They were released last night on humanitarian grounds, a statement from Hamas said, though no further detail was given as to why they had been singled out. They were later pictured, freedom finally allowing a relieved smile, talking on the phone to the US President Joe Biden.
We welcome their release. We share in the relief that their families, friends, and loved ones are feeling. But there are still 10 additional Americans who remain unaccounted for in this conflict.
Thousands of miles away, for the family and friends of Natalie and Judith, a moment of light amid the dark days of the past weeks.
We want to use this moment to once again thank God for this incredible miracle today.
The American mother and daughter were on holiday when they were kidnapped from a kibbutz in southern Israel in the Hamas October the 7th attacks. Natalie's brother says the past 13 days have felt like 13 years.
My father texted the group saying they think they're free, but we're not sure, and so please don't have any hope because we really don't want to disappoint. And then as it became clearer and clearer with the news reports that it was a mother and a daughter, our reactions just became more and more intense.
The two women's release was negotiated with the help of the Qataris, but any joy at their freedom is dimmed by the shadow of the more than 200 left behind. Places at this Sabbath table in Tel Aviv left empty by families who gathered to call for their immediate return. For now, they can only wait, writing messages of love and longing into the silence. They have no idea where or how their loved ones are, but hope one day soon they will be allowed to come home. Well, earlier I spoke to Udi Goren, whose cousin Tal Haimi is missing and believed to be among the hostages being held in Gaza. I began by asking him what he knows so far about what happened to his cousin.
Tal is declared missing. We think he's a hostage due to the circumstances, and the uncertainty is probably as hard on us as this entire event, just not knowing what to expect. What are we hoping for? All we know to this point is that we haven't found his body. He's not in any of the Israeli hospitals, and his phone was traced to Gaza. So our hope is that they didn't bother carrying a body back with them and that he is still alive.
As you say, that uncertainty is really, really difficult. But the release of these other two hostages at least gives you some hope, you say?
I'm glad two women came out alive and well, which proves that there is a possibility for negotiation. I mean, everything around us, politicians speaking and the politicians coming into Israel that keep talking about the way that we need to fight back and we need to retaliate and we have the right to retaliate. Sunak was, very firm on how the UK stands with Israel. Biden was very firm on how he stands with Israel. But we are no longer on the defense. We definitely have the right to defend ourselves. We are no longer on the defense because now the situation is contained. And right now, Israel is at a crossroads. Are we going to the offense part of this war, or do we put humans' lives first and foremost, the top priority, as I feel any democracy should have? Because people's lives in 2023, in a Western country that upholds democratic values, should not be sacrificed for anything.
So what do you want the Israeli government and governments like the British government, who, as you say, Mr. Sunak went to say he stands by Israel, he stands by Israel's right to defend itself. What should they be doing now for your cousin, for all the other hostages, and perhaps people living in Gaza?
First and foremost is stopping the war. Stop the killing. This is a message I don't see how anyone cannot get behind. Stop the killing. Stop killing Gazan civilians. Stop killing Israeli civilians, and save the lives of 200 hostages. The window of time to do it is now, and this would serve everybody's interest. So if Netanyahu can promise me 100% that sacrificing 200 people is going to save the lives of all 9 million Israelis for the upcoming years, what can I say? I can't beat this argument. But since we were dragged into this war, we didn't initiate it. I haven't heard a single politician saying, what's the vision for the day after? But how are we going to make sure that this is actually the last war with Gaza? And I will tell you something. It's not going to be the last war with Gaza, because violence will not be resolved with violence.
Udi Goren, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, tonight in Tel Aviv, there's a vigil calling for all the hostages to be brought home safely. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Sikandar Kamani, is there. Sikandar.
That's right, Matt. Behind me, a vigil has been being held by families of some of those abducted by Hamas and taken to Gaza. Of course, the fact that 2 hostages were released last night has given some of them a glimmer of hope, but particularly for those families whose relatives are not dual nationals, they have sole Israeli citizenship. They really don't know what level of hope to allow themselves to have. I was speaking to one young Israeli man whose brother is confirmed as having been taken to Gaza. His brother's wife was killed. Their 2-year-old child is still here in Israel, hoping, of course, the family that the father can make it back here safely. But this man was telling me that he really wants the Israeli government to prioritize negotiations for the release of the hostages. It's something that he thinks at the moment is not the priority. Military commanders and political leaders have very much been today and in previous days talking up this much anticipated, imminent, we believe, ground offensive in Gaza. And clashes have also been continuing along the northern part of Israel with Hezbollah. There are real fears that this conflict could expand, could escalate even further. There's also been strings of arrests, hundreds of arrests in the occupied West Bank. Both of those conflicts in kind of with Lebanon and in the occupied West Bank somewhat contained, but really have the potential to erupt even further. And finally, just one note about the situation in Gaza. We've been hearing from sources there that leaflets have been distributed to people in the north, warning them that if they don't evacuate, they'll be considered by the Israeli military as having an affiliation with terrorist groups. No comment from the Israeli military, but that's certainly heightening fears of people there that the bloodshed is only going to get even worse.
Sikandar, thanks very much indeed. Now, he was Israel's top gun, a highly decorated fighter pilot who took part in Operation Opera, the attack on Iraq's Syrak nuclear reactor in 1981. He became a brigadier general in the IDF, involved with the highest levels of the Israeli military. After he retired, Relik Shafir was active in protesting against the legal reform of the Prime Minister Netanyahu. I asked him what he thinks of the possible military operation into Gaza. Do you think that a full-scale ground invasion of the Gaza Strip, which has been suggested, is a good idea or not?
Probably not a good idea. A full-scale invasion will create so much damage and will not bring the required or requested results, so to speak. We're not going to stay in Gaza. Are
you sure about that?
I'm quite sure.
Because that's been tried before and it didn't work.
It didn't work, and it's not a good idea. There are 2.5 million people out there who need to be either self-administered or administered by people who they choose. So I think the military is there to take out the Hamas infrastructure and take the sting out of their military operations, and that's it.
And can they do that?
Yes, obviously we can do that, but the price is really the question. It really depends on where your end game is. That is something that we'll have to think about. Right now, the blood is gushing. We're emotionally unstable, so to speak.
Which is not a great state of mind to be in when you're planning something as perilous as this strategic operation.
You're quite right, but time is of the essence. We don't have all the time in the world, we understand that. So we need to govern our hearts with our minds, because public emotions now are more towards the revenge side.
What Israel left in Gaza is not viable for creating a flourishing mini-state. Would you accept that?
Yes, true.
So that needs to be fixed in order for the resentment, as you say, to come down a notch.
Yes.
But does the public get that here, the Israeli public?
Some of the public understands that. It's a human thing that if people do not have hope, they will revert to war. And perhaps like the 1973 war, this is part of life here, right? After the 1973 war, President Sadat felt that he had regained his, I would say, his honor, and came and made peace. And maybe at this time, I know it's too early to say, but maybe it's something that we can learn from.
Malik Shafir, thank you very much.
My pleasure.